It's, I did that too, when I saw my name.
One, two.
But his wife said to me, you meet the nicest people. And I think this guy thinks everything I do is we were worried about you. Why? No, I oh my God. And they know.
Jordan. Jordan.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, how you doing?
How are you?
Jordan.
I just wanted to
It's
say.
clear.
We were at service
about now?
last night. Yeah, and yours? Oh, thank you so
Pretty
much.
good. Yes. Testing.
Better than one.
Jordan.
Oh, you're nice. It
Jordan.
summarized our feelings about what's going on. In a way.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear you say that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's working. All right, Rabbi.
Are we all set?
Yeah, be careful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Move it up a little. Good. Thanks. All right. So if I trip,
One of these beautiful people is gonna catch you.
I'll fall slowly.
So she's staying with her, and we go and have tickets for games and watch all the TV.
That's very, probably, I think for a market.
Sure, it's more comfortable.
It's gorgeous. I mean, it's great to be alive.
Yes,
On a day like this.
You're right.
Of course you have a response.
Rather than us doing
She said that Ricky went with me and we were getting radiation out in Florida. But she said, I really don't sketch. So supposedly there's
We'll need some decisions. We'll have some decisions.
Good morning, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to those live streaming. Glad to have you, of course, as always. Beautiful day. Wonderful to have it late in November. So maybe we can sail right into April. Wouldn't that be nice? Okay, so thank you to Jackie Weiner for sponsoring the bagels, and to Doris for picking up the bagels. Thank you so much. And it looks like the Torah Study Fund has come to the live stream rescue again. So thanks for your participation in this. I'm always just so grateful for it. Let's do our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, who has sanctified us through God's commandments, commanding us to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. We're about to move into a new topic this morning, but first I want to just reflect a little bit on what we did last week. One of the great things for me, I have to say it, about these conversations is, some teachers just love to come and declaim and leave. Here's my view, take it or leave it, see you next week. That does not happen here. So every now and then I make an attempt to declaim, but all kidding aside, the conversation is always so stimulating for me, and it has its afterglow even after I leave. And last week especially, because one of the things I'm privileged to be able to do with all of you is to pose an idea, a hypothesis. I'm always doing it, believing it. I think that's incumbent upon a teacher or a preacher to believe what he or she is saying, but always to be open for insight that the declaimer didn't anticipate. And so we learn from each other, which I think is just so wonderful. It's, I guess, one of the meanings of the word dynamic. It's not a static, I'm talking, you're listening, or you're talking and I'm listening, and when it's over, it's over. It's always got a life of its own, and some weeks more than others. So I was proposing that the Bible features the idea of sibling rivalry in a variety of manifestations. And what I learned last week was that I hadn't thought it through as carefully as I might have. That doesn't bother me. It happens regularly, and that's why we're in conversation. Because I think that what emerged last week was that some of the relationships that I considered prima facie, let's say, to be sibling rivalries really weren't. And that sibling rivalry, at least as that phenomenon, maybe other relationships too, depend upon time, upon the ripening or the decline of the relationship. And if it has a moment or two, it can be described as a difficulty, as a problem in the relationship, but a rivalry requires the development of a relationship over time. And in this sense, I think that Cain and Abel is not a sibling rivalry, because there's just one moment of conflict. I tried to make the case last week that Moses and Aaron is a sibling rivalry, but now it doesn't seem to me to be the case. If you remember the vote last week about it, what I learned from it is that I was the last one to get that. Cain and Abel and Moses and Aaron are similar in the sense that the relationship is not only a personal relationship, but it's a kind of relationship. They represent types also, shepherd and farmer. And the difference in lifestyle, the way one lives one's life. And implicitly, I think the Bible has a polemic against the city, against sedentary life, which can be seen to be autonomous, self-sufficient, as opposed to nomadic life, where you're constantly in mind of your vulnerabilities in life. And Moses and Aaron as well are types, prophet and priest, different ways of leading a people. Really all we saw in terms of rivalry was that one episode, crucial episode, on on the golden calf, where they really do clash. And so that is a moment of crisis in their relationship. Forget the issue of type for a second, and just think in terms of relationship. It is a relationship, and it is a crisis in the relationship, but that's about all there is of that rivalry. So Jacob and Esau, I believe, qualify as a sibling rivalry because it happens over time and it happens in a variety of instances. And of course, the 20 years of silence in their relationship culminates in reconciliation. And Jacob is afraid of meeting Esau, which means he has continued to carry that rivalry. So it satisfies the criterion of development and temporality. Joseph and his brothers, I believe, qualifies as a sibling rivalry because that too happens over time and reaches a kind of climactic moment, like Jacob and Esau, when there's reconciliation. So those two relationships have a kind of arc. Come on in. I've rethought it a little bit and think that there's less of it than I initially thought. Jim?
Well, but the other dynamic that I don't see how we can leave it out.
Yes.
When you get to Joseph and the brothers.
Yes.
There's a lot of different mothers involved there, so the rivalry becomes, I think, exponentially convoluted. In our world, that's not a normal family setup.
Yeah. Although there are blended families.
I mean,
where there are different.
In modern times, if you read an engagement announcement, somehow the person has 8 grandparents.
Yeah.
Well, that's down. But in my growing up,
Yeah.
You lived with your real mother and father.
Right. So, I mean, I think what you're pointing out is that let's divide the issue, at least for this purpose, into 2 categories. The conditions in which the relationship takes place, which can also then be seen as causes. What are the causal factors? And the relationship itself. And you're pointing to another condition in which that set of relationships becomes the more complex. And I think that's true. And I think we recognize, well, that's one of the things that even in the so-called non-sibling rivalry stories like Cain and Abel, now I'm calling it a non-sibling rivalry, we see the role of the parents, the role of the mother, and so on. So even in the relationships that, according to this discussion, don't qualify as sibling rivalries, we have factors that affect the relationship among the siblings. Okay, so I found that to be, for me, really a wonderful moment. I mean, generally when I say let's take a vote, I assume that at least somebody is going to be on my side. And when it doesn't happen, I have to take it seriously. Unless I can assume, and I've toyed with this assumption but have abandoned it, that none of you knows what you're talking about. I have to take it seriously. Many years ago, so maybe some of you were in Torah Study at that point, we had this discussion about David, whether David was a hero or not. And I maintain that he is ultimately a big hero. I mean, God loves David. Everybody loves David. But if you look at the phenomena, David really is a very problematic guy. And I was constantly trying to boost David's reputation until somebody, I think it was Marion Englander of blessed memory, came up one session and gave me a T-shirt with initials FOD on it, friend of David, which I had to wear. We also had this discussion, if you remember, about is there a counter narrative in the book of Joshua? And I said yes, and everybody else said no. When I tell that story to people, I say, and finally at the end of it, that set of discussions, there was only one person in the room who still thought so. And they said, well, who was that? I said, well, it was me. And I do talks a couple of times a year to the Forest Hills Church, in their Bible and religious studies. And I said to the person who organizes it after I did it the last time that I'm ready to take another crack at the counter narrative of Joshua, if you would like to do that. Don't you think there is, by the way? I certainly do. Okay, so enough of that. But this is part of the joy and the fun of what we are doing. So I want to move now to love and friendship. Extremely rich topic. Certainly love figures throughout the Bible in both human terms, human relationships, and especially in the relationship between God and the people. Love is quite pervasive. So what I'd like to do is to begin looking at kinds of love among human beings, and then we'll turn to the relationship between God and Israel, which is extremely rich. So just to look at different expressions of love. First of all, Genesis 29, Jacob and Rachel. Genesis 29. So here, of course, is during this period when he is fleeing from Esau, and he comes to the abode of Laban, and we know the story there. So Genesis 29, Jacob resumed his journey and came to the land of the Easterners. There before his eye was a well in the open. 3 flocks of sheep were lying there beside it, for the flocks were watered from that well. The stone, by the way, I do not appreciate the passive voice here, the verb, were watered by, because the verbs are in the active voice, so that Yashku ha'adarim, they watered the flock, okay? And that's very important, as we'll see in a second. The stone, middle of verse 2, on the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the stone would be rolled from the mouth of the well. So in the Hebrew, when the flocks were gathered there, they rolled the galalu et ha'evan. Not it was rolled. When you say that the stone was rolled, that suppresses the question of how many people does it take to roll the stone off. Was rolled is indefinite. It could be one person, it could be 2, it could be 5. When you say they rolled, that says that it takes more than one, which is augmented by this claim in verse 2 that the stone was large. Okay, and that's an important, as we'll see, feature of this story. Verse 3 again. When all the flocks were gathered there, the stone would be rolled from the mouth of the well and the sheep watered. Then the stone would be put back into place. In Hebrew, beheshivu et ha'evan. They returned the stone to its place. Jacob said to them, "My friends, where are you from?" And they said, "We are from Haran." And he said to them, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? Remember, Nahor is Abraham's brother. So Laban is Jacob's cousin. And they said, yes, we do. And he continued, is he well? And the answer was yes. They answered, yes, he is. And there is his daughter Rachel coming with the flock. He said, it is still broad daylight, too early to round up the animals, water the flock, and take them to pasture. But they said, we cannot until all the flocks are rounded up. Then the stone is rolled off. Then we roll the stone in Hebrew. I can't find it, but that's what it says. Then the stone is rolled off the mouth of the well and water the sheep. While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's flocks, for she was a shepherdess. And when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of his uncle Laban, and the flocks, Jacob went up and rolled the stone off the mouth of the well. So it takes more than one shepherd, but Jacob can do it by himself, which strikes me, maybe you'll disagree, it's an inference, that Jacob has fallen in love with Rachel on the spot. He is enamored of her. And therefore he has superhuman strength to be able to do what it requires three people in ordinary circumstances to do. I think this is an indirect, but I think artful way of saying that he's infatuated. Jacob went up and rolled the stone off the mouth of the well and watered the flock of his uncle Laban. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and broke into tears. Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman, that he was Rebekah's son. She ran and told her father. On hearing the news of his sister's son Jacob, Laban ran to greet him. He embraced him and kissed him and took him into his house. He told Laban all that had happened, and Laban said to him, you are truly my bone and flesh. When he stayed with him a month's time, Laban said to Jacob, just because you are a kinsman, should you serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be? Now Laban had two daughters. The name of the older one was Leah. The name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes. Rachel was shapely and beautiful. Jacob loved Rachel. So he answered, I'll serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. By the way, this seems to be unfair to Leah. I mean, Leah is certainly the fall person, the fall guy, so to speak, in this story, contrasted with Rachel. But remember, Leah gets both David's lineage and the priest's lineage. Her first four sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Jacob, and Judah. So Judah is one of the chief brothers in the Joseph story, and also from whom comes David, the tribe of Judah. And the tribe of Judah is the one remaining tribe that returns from the Babylonian exile much later. So that though Leah is pushed into the back seat in this story, she, I don't know, I was going to say gets her comeuppance, but she probably wouldn't resonate with that idea herself. She does get ample compensation for it by siring the two most important, in terms of history, sons, right? So, verse 19. So Laban said, better that I give her to you than that I should give her to an outsider. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of his love for her. It's a beautiful love story, and it's a love at first sight story, which deepens and which grows. So it's not just an infatuation of the moment. So that's one type of love and a very powerful and I think artfully written story. Let's look at Genesis chapter 24. And we want to look at Isaac and Rebekah.
Yeah.
So chapter 24 of Genesis. So it's maybe the longest chapter in the Chumash. I'm not sure. 67 verses. It's a long story. But it's the story initiated by Abraham, who sends his servant. We could call him Eliezer. He's named Eliezer back in Genesis 15, but never named in this story, so that we could presume it's Eliezer, but we don't know for sure. So I tend to call him Abraham's servant or Abraham's assistant, goes out and at Abraham's behest to find a wife for Isaac. And that's a wonderful story in its own right. But then, after some complexities, Rebekah agrees to go with this person and to come down to Abraham's family and marry Isaac. And then we have in verse 62, Isaac had just come back from the vicinity of Be'er Lahai Roi, for he was settled in the region of the Negev. And Isaac went out walking in the field toward evening, and looking up, he saw camels approaching. Raising her eyes, Rebekah saw Isaac. Here's how I imagine what the author of those two sentences was feeling when he wrote this. I am going to show indirectly the difference between Rebekah and Isaac. Isaac is seeing and naming the first thing that comes into his head. The camels are coming with somebody on it, but the camels are much more prominent due to size than who's on it. So Isaac is a person who sees what is most apparent to his eyes. Rebekah sees Isaac because she recognizes that she's got a role to play in this story, that she's going to be an important player in Isaac's story. So Isaac sees the surface, and Rebekah sees beneath the surface. Isaac has sight, Rebekah has insight. And now, one can overstate this, and maybe I have already, but it does strike me that these two claims are right next to each other, and so we are pushed to contrast what it is each sees. Isaac, verse 63, went out walking in the field toward the evening, late in the afternoon. You know, the rabbis say, because they're trying to justify their innovations. Once the temple is going to be a little circuitous, let me see if I can bring it back. Once the temple is destroyed, there are no longer sacrificial worship opportunities with which to feel intimacy with God. And so the rabbis had to create something else. And what they created was prayer. And they needed to make the claim that their innovation really wasn't as innovative as it might seem. It's grounded in tradition. And one of the ways they did that was to say that the worship services, Shacharit the morning, Mincha afternoon, Mariv evening, and Musaf, the additional service, are each of them linked to a sacrificial opportunity on a daily basis when the temple was standing. So the Shachri, the morning worship service, let's call it a prayer book service, even though there wasn't a prayer book yet, corresponded to the morning sacrifice, and the afternoon corresponded to the mincha service, the mincha sacrifice, and so on, so that their innovation had deep precedent. In a way, it was carrying on the purpose of the sacrifices in a different form. Okay? Another way, and this is why I bring this up, another way in which they do this is they attribute to each patriarch the origin of one of those services. So Abraham gets up early in the morning, Shachrit service. Here Isaac went out walking toward evening in the afternoon. Isaac is one of the originators of Mincha, the Mincha service. And Jacob, of course, is a nighttime kind of guy. When he's running away from Esau, he lies down at night, right? And he has this dream. Jacob is Mariv. So that the rabbis, in two different ways, show or create, we'll have to say, the idea that the origin of the prayer book, the service of the heart, Avodah Shebalev, has long precedent back into the past. I think it's very, very creative, an act of legitimation that both the sacrificial worship and what the patriarchs aren't just the first. We said this over and over again. Patriarchs aren't just first in time. They lay down the principles of the religion of Israel. Maya?
What are those 4 sacrifices during the day? And it's new to me.
What are they?
Yeah.
You mean Shachrit, Mincha?
No, you said that it's based on the sacrifices that were done 4 times a day.
Yes, 3 times a day.
Okay.
And on Shabbat and holidays, Musaf, an additional.
But why were there sacrifices in the time of the temple?
Why were they sacrifices? I don't know the answer to that. Why do we have morning, afternoon, and evening? I don't know. I don't know if it's ever explained. It's a good question. You're asking what are the grounds for those 3, or on Shabbat 4 and holiday 4? I don't know. I think they're just there. They're just announced. But it's a good question. If I can remember the question, I'll look into it. Okay, all right. So that's a little aside about Isaac. But the rabbis know their text. If they're trying to justify, legitimate the services, and they want to do it with the patriarchs, they better know their stories of the patriarchs. And here, this may seem like a stretch, but nevertheless. Okay, so verse 63. And Isaac went out walking in the field toward evening, and looking up, he saw the camels approaching. Raising her eyes, Rebekah saw Isaac. She alighted from the camel and said to the servant, "Who's that man walking in the field toward us?" And the servant said, "That's my master." So she took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. Isaac then brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he took Rebekah as his wife. Isaac loved her, and thus found comfort after his mother's death. That's a lovely little story, isn't it? I think it's very rich. It is a love story, but it's a very different kind of love than the love of Jacob toward Rachel, which is amorous, passionate, and so on. This is a love between 2 people that bring comfort to one another, a kind of domestic love. One can make too much of this. I'm about to. But verse 67, Isaac then brought her into his tent of his mother and took her as his wife. Isaac loved her. It doesn't say Isaac loved her and took her as his wife. Took her as his wife and loved her. Here's the too much part. I'm making a temporal claim that first he married her and then he loved her. You remember this moment in Fiddler on the Roof where he asks his wife, "Do you love me?" You remember that? And she asks, "Well, I've been doing this for him. I've been doing that for him over the years. I've been doing all these." "I guess I do." Very different from the chronology of Jacob and Rachel.
Because it's an arranged marriage.
Okay, very good. Yeah, no, it's an arranged marriage, right. Abraham sends his servant to the family, so to keep the lineage direct.
But Tevye says that God is the matchmaker for everybody, so one way or another, there is something that puts people together that maybe is not tangible.
Right. The mystery part. Yeah. No, I think that's true. I think in Jewish folklore, when, I don't know exactly whether I'm getting this exactly right, but when a boy and a girl, a boy in one family, a girl in another, the families know each other, and they're going to match the boy and the girl later, they plant trees, each of them, and at the time of the marriage, the trees are cut down and serve as the branches of the chuppah. So another way of arranging, of thinking about an arranged marriage, right? Marriage is made in heaven, the idea. Yeah. Okay, so what do you think it means when the author says, brought her into the tent of his mother? So, obviously she is comforting him for the death of his mother, but she becomes, don't you think, a substitute for his mother, and therefore takes on, at this moment, symbolically at least, which then she takes on in terms of actions, a leadership role in the family. I mean, Rebecca is, of four matriarchs, I think the most important, the most decisive and consequential. And so that she's brought into the tent of his mother. She fills the void in Isaac's life, but also the void in terms of role. She is now taking on Sarah's role. So this is another kind of love in the Bible. Harry?
Yes, I get the impression that the relationship between Jacob and Rachel was an infatuation.
Yes.
Rather than true love, because he liked her because she was shapely and beautiful.
Yes.
While her sister Leah had weak eyes. I don't know whether that means ugly or not. But whereas there doesn't seem to be anything, spiritual in the love between Jacob and Rachel.
Yeah. And I think that's the point. I mean, without drawing too many consequences, it is a kind of love by infatuation. It's a love at first sight. It's the arousal of passion. Now I think the relationship does deepen. He mourns when she dies and so on. He takes pains to bury her. So, as usual, we have too little evidence to draw big conclusions, but that does seem to be a relationship that deepens. And when, at the beginning of the Joseph story, it said he loves Joseph more than the other brothers. He's the child of his old age, does it say? I can't remember. That he's also the child of Rachel. And if that can be made, then there's another piece of evidence that Rachel was the favored wife. But no, I think you're very right about that. Even in this very short little story about Isaac and Rebecca, we get a sense of something deeper. She's giving him comfort. She's in the tent of his mother. There seems to be a relationship in the making in this story. Okay, let's look at Rachel.
Isaac had very specific needs because after the binding of Isaac, he lived with his mother, not with his father. Prior to lived in his mother's tent. He didn't have a father anymore because of their estrangement after that. He needed comfort because he was traumatized at that point, and he had specific needs very different than the kind of needs that Jacob had.
I like that. So Russell is saying that if we look at the background to this story, or at least the antecedents, Isaac is much closer to his mother, and therefore her absence would affect him much more than, let's say, the absence of Abraham, who has traumatized him. Yeah, no, very, very good. Okay. Let's look at another form of love here. For that, we're going to look at 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel chapter 13. When somebody finds the page, call it out. Which what? 483? 8. Say it again. 488. Okay, so this is the story of Tamar, Amnon, and Absalom. I am just trying to see something here. David and Bathsheba. David confesses his guilt and God says to him, all right, I accept it, but your family shall be troubled as the outcome of your crime. And then we have a little bit of a story about a war in verse 26 of chapter 12. Joab attacked Rabbah and so on, kind of an interlude or a digression. And then in chapter 13, we see the beginning of the problems besetting the family of David, which can be seen as stories in their own right, important stories in their own right, but also this is now the spinning out of the consequences of David's violation. So it can be seen in Greek terms, we might say, as the arrival of Nemesis to come back and bite the one who has violated certain norms. So, this happened sometime afterwards. See where I am? Absalom, son of David, had a beautiful sister named Tamar, and Amnon, son of David, became infatuated with her. The verb in Hebrew is ahava, love, v'ye'ehaveha, and he loved her, so that the important thing about that is that the author is now talking about a kind of love. It's certainly not the love of Jacob for Rachel or Isaac for Rebekah, but it still falls, according to the author, under the category of love of a different kind. I think we could name it as sexual obsession. So, Amnon, verse 2, was so distraught because of his half-sister Tamar that he became sick, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. Amnon had a friend named Yonadav, the son of David's brother Shema. Yonadav was a very clever man. He asked him, "Why are you so dejected, O prince, morning after morning? Tell me." And Amnon replied, "I am in love," and I'm looking here for his, ani ohev, I am in love, he says. So once again, just pointing out that this word love is given broad connotation at this point. I'm in love with Tamar, the sister of my brother Absalom. Yonadav said to him, "Lie down in your bed and pretend you are sick. When your father comes to see you, say to him, 'Let my sister Tamar come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare the food in front of me so that I may look on and let her serve it to me.'" So he contrives this plot as a function or an outgrowth of his obsession with her. That's the point I think the author is trying to bring out. Amnon lay down and pretended to be sick. The king came to see him, and Amnon said to the king, "Let my sister Tamar come and prepare a couple of cakes in front of me, and let her bring them to me." David sent a message to Tamar in the palace, "Please go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him." Tamar, so David is now brought in, is complicit really in this plot, unknowingly probably. Tamar, don't you think the author is also hinting at or indirectly suggesting that David is going to suffer in this too, and therefore this can also be seen as the punishment, part of the punishment of David, indirectly through what happens to others. Tamar, verse 8, went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was in bed. She took dough and kneaded it into cakes in front of him and cooked the cakes. She took the pan and set out the cakes, but Amnon refused to eat and ordered everyone to withdraw. After everyone had withdrawn, Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food inside and feed me." Tamar took the cakes she had made and brought them to her brother inside. But when she served them to him, he caught hold of her and said to her, "Come lie with me, sister." But she said to him, "Don't, brother, don't force me. Such things are not done in Israel. Don't do such a vile thing. Where will I carry my shame? And you will be like any of the scoundrels in Israel. Please speak to the king. He will not refuse me to you." I love that move by the author, showing that she knows she's in trouble. Can she get him to delay? She's willing, she says, to go along with it, but get the permission of David. So it's a stalling move on her part. But he would not listen to her. He overpowered her and laid with her by force. Then Amnon felt a very great loathing for her. It's great psychological insight here, don't you think? His loathing for her was greater than the passion that he felt for her. And the word for passion here is ahava, love. Okay? I think it's important to point that out because one cannot think of this as a kind of love, but the author is insisting that it is. A very bad, brutal kind of love, not to be praised, but a part of the connotative range of the word love. And Amnon said to her, "Get out." She pleaded with him, "Please don't commit this wrong. To send me away would be even worse than the first wrong you committed against me." But he would not listen to her. He summoned his young attendant and says, "Get that woman out of my presence," and barred the door behind her. She was wearing an ornamental tunic, for maiden princesses were customarily dressed in such garments. That's an evocative comment. I don't know whether it relates to Joseph, whether it's supposed to, but it's the same garb. His attendant took her outside and barred the door after her. Tamar put dust on her head, rent the ornamented tunic she was wearing. She put her hands on her head and walked away screaming loudly as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, "Was it your brother Amnon who did this to you? For the present, sister, keep quiet about it. He's your brother, don't brood over the matter." And Tamar remained in her brother Absalom's house forlorn. When King David heard all about this, he was greatly upset. Once again, to me, there's resonance here. He's upset about the event, but is he also upset because Nathan the prophet had predicted that he would be punished through the events befalling his family? And does he also recognize that? Is he upset in two ways? One for the event and the other, maybe he thinks this is a Twilight Zone moment, right? Eerie.
Well, he also helped it happen because he had him
he had her come to him. He was part of that grouping saying, come take your brother.
Absolutely, yeah. So David is the one who arranges for her to come. And the question is David derelict in his family duty? Shouldn't he know that something is astir in the house? I don't know that we have evidence for that, but I've always wondered about that. Whether this shows that David is self-absorbed and not attentive to what is going on around him. I mean, the text doesn't give us any evidence for that, but you wonder about it. Absalom didn't utter, I guess I want to make another comment about that now that I think about it. If there's some plausibility to the speculation that the author is hinting at something more than is being said, not just that David got her to go in, but that David is also now recognizing that nemesis, that comeuppance, is about to happen too. And if, I'm making a point about reading and writing, does the plausibility of the reader's speculation about a factor for which there is no direct evidence in the text a tribute to the author's capacity to be suggestive without saying it? And therefore, the whole enterprise of Midrash is not just readers making stuff up, but readers feeling the suggestiveness of the author. That's the point that I'm making. Does the author display a depth of awareness, even through indirection, which justifies midrashic reading speculation? In other words, is the Bible a kind of text that beckons interpretation? That's the point that I'm making. Stuart?
Okay. David accedes to the suggestion that she go to Amnon's house and prepare cakes and feed them to him.
Right.
I don't buy it.
What don't you buy?
I think David is complicit in this. And she then tells Amnon to tell the king, to ask the king for permission.
Yes.
And he will not refuse me to you. So he is suggesting, or she is suggesting that
the king's in on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the interpretation I gave to it a few minutes ago was that this was a stalling device. When she says he won't refuse me, that is meant to convince Amnon not to follow through with this now, and this will give her time to get away. You're reading it in a different way. I mean, you're reading it as something more literal, that when she says he won't refuse, she knows that David is complicitous in this episode.
Yes.
And why would he be?
I don't know.
Complicitous
She is Amnon's half-sister.
True. And therefore of less concern for David? Well, David is the father of both through different mothers.
Right.
Parental favoritism.
I'm sorry?
Parental favoritism.
Could be. Who's he favoring here?
Amnon.
His firstborn. Is he his firstborn? Wow, I never thought of that. David is complicitous in this? Wow. Amy?
He did the same thing when he wanted Bathsheba. So it's like he can relate to his son and know that, you know, according to him, you can't fight the feeling. So maybe he feels like he owes it to the son to be able to make that come to fruition as much as it did for him.
Oh, boy. Although it ended badly for him, why wouldn't
Well,
he?
misery loves company.
Okay, where am I going to find that in the Bible? Yeah. I kind of read the parallelism here as another way of alerting the reader, if not David, to this is measure for measure. What has made him, what has defeated him, is now defeating him again through his family as punishment. So we have the hypothesis on the table that in one way or another, David is complicitous in this plot of Amnon. Boy, that does not ring true for me, but hey,
Absalom,
I've been wrong before.
Absalom takes on the role of David in ordering Amnon to be killed.
Yeah. And who did David order to be killed? Oh, Uriah.
Uriah.
Yeah.
So another parallel in the story. But it strikes me again that a plausible reading is measure for measure.
Yeah.
What defeated David or what caused David the woe is now causing his family woe as a way of punishing David through his family. That's the whole idea here. Maya?
I thought that you are going to imply that finally Absalom is against David, and maybe that fuels him, or part of the revenge is coming from this episode. So that way the prophecy against David, because his family is rising against him.
So I'm not sure I follow your point. Later on in the story, Absalom usurps the authority of David, and he does it in an especially picturesque way. His assistant says to him, go up on the roof of the palace and have intercourse with David's concubines as a way of supplanting David. And then, of course...
I was thinking about the episode that he's actively rebelling against him.
He's what?
That actively is rebelling against him, that Absalom goes against David.
Oh, that's true, but do you see that here in this Amnon story?
I think that Absalom is resentful for David's role in the whole situation, and maybe that fuels him later on.
Okay. So that nemesis is having its way on a variety of levels in these stories. Yes?
It says here, was it your brother?
Can you speak a little louder, please?
He says, was it your brother? Absalom says to Tamar, was it your brother Amnon? This is your brother.
What verse are you at?
Oh, I'm at 20.
You're at 20.
Yeah.
Okay, start again, please.
Was it your brother Amnon who did this to you? For the present sister, keep quiet about it. He is your brother. Don't brood over the matter. Well, that's incest. I mean, that's worse than if he had, just taken somebody at random, but rape is rape. And that's her brother. Now, I don't know that I think Ammon was by one wife and Absalom by another.
I think that's right.
Yeah, but they're still a half brother.
Right.
And that's, he's talking about it as if, well, it's your brother, don't worry about it. I don't get that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So, verse 20, her brother Absalom said to her, this is when she walked away screaming loudly, brother said to her, was it your brother Amnon who did this to you? for present sister, keep quiet about it. He's your brother. Don't brood over the matter. And you're puzzled by why he would say that.
Yeah, I mean, that's very serious, and, serious enough to cause a war.
So to me, the answer to that is that he is stalling for time to develop a plot against Amnon. He doesn't want it exposed right now because the punishment might be less than he's looking for. So he's really going to step back and devise a plot to kill Amnon, which he does. So I think it's stalling and not approval.
Oh.
How do I know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to know what the protocols were in the family, in the sexual, because who knows, I mean, if they find out that she's been raped, sometimes they kill the woman.
Oh, sure. In the Bible?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, once again, a very laconic text. It raises a lot of questions that it doesn't seem to answer. Somebody had a Jordan.
The footnote F talks about the Septuagint adding.
Yeah.
Talking about David, he did not rebuke his son Ammon, for he favored him, since he was his firstborn.
Nice.
So that's two things. That's pretty heavy parental favoritism. And when do we trust the Septuagint versus the text we're reading?
Why don't we?
When there are two different texts.
Well, that's true. Well, sure. The Septuagint is the first translation of the Bible, probably begun around 150, 250 before the Common Era. The Dead Sea Scrolls, I think, have discovered different text types. 3 text types: Babylonian, Palestinian, and Egyptian. The rabbis would say that the Septuagint has deliberately distorted the text. That is, the rabbis think there is one basic text, and that's the Hebrew, the veritas, the true text, and that the others are distortions. But the Dead Sea Scrolls have revealed that there were different textual traditions, and the Septuagint is an expression of one of them. Does that respond to your...
That's the question of which do we read, but the point in that footnote is parental favoritism for the firstborn again.
Right. So the Septuagint seems to be this footnote that some of you have. You can see the footnote here. The Septuagint may be trying to fill in a blank. Why is it that David favored Amnon? Why is it that he sent Tamar in to and Stuart's point about complicit? If he's complicit, why would he be? Well, Amnon is his firstborn. So the Septuagint seems to be answering a question which the reader asks and for which the Hebrew text gives no answer. It's an interesting point here. The author of the Septuagint version is puzzled by this, and therefore, now I was going to say add something. But you notice that's a bias to say add something. Add something to what? Some prior text, the text, this text. And that would be a false assumption that the author of the Septuagint is adding something. This is the Septuagint story. Ron?
I am troubled. I guess that's the word. I'm deeply bothered, but I'm deeply troubled.
You're bothered by this story.
My question. It seems to me that in the passage through, verse 13, where she is Tamar's begging Amnon, look, don't rape me. Don't force me. Ask your father, ask the king, and he'll certainly give me to you. It seems like a tacit blessing for close familial incest.
Oh.
Versus rape.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
It's okay, a little incest, advice is nice, incest is best. But it would be a bigger sin, a shanda,
Right.
for the rape of a sister than the incest of the sister.
So what are you saying, Ron? When she says, ask the king, and he'll say yes, that's a signal to the reader that we're not dealing with rape here, but sanctioned relations.
It could have been a sanctioned relationship if Amnon wasn't quite as...
Right. I guess my question about that is, why would this story move in the direction of this is okay in some custom? Because the story is the beginning of a long series of episodes in which David, and therefore his family, is suffering because of his great sin. So if that's true, these stories need to be gruesome and not a part of a different customary order. In other words, I think that interpretation...
Which is the source of my puzzlement.
I'm sorry?
Which is the source of my, to quote the king of Siam, it's a puzzlement.
Why is it a puzzlement? This is a shanda that a brother is going to rape a sister, which is going to lead to the murder of the...
Speak to the king. He will not refuse me to you.
No, I think that's a good point. And here we have a little distinction between how to read that. I read it as a stalling tactic. She's just trying to get him not to act now. You'll act later, and meanwhile she'll escape. So I'm seeing it as a ruse, so to speak, whereas some here are seeing it literally. When I say that David will not refuse him, I mean that literally. David will not. In my interpretation, that's not what she's implying. Yes?
Hi. So my name is Jessica. I'm from Erie. I'm just in town. But I happen to also have a background, and I used to be a rape crisis counselor. And this would be a typical stalling technique because you're in fight or flight. You're trying to logically come up with what you need to do in order to get out of that situation. So I agree with you and what you're saying, that it's definitely a stalling tactic. And with the Absalom saying about, like keeping it quiet, this is normal. This is what everybody knows this, and any person who's gone through this kind of situation knows how this works. The woman gets blamed.
Yeah.
So you have to sweep it under the rug. Family business, will handle it quietly. But don't speak up about it, because then you get shamed.
In other words, by his saying, don't talk about it, he's trying to protect her.
Right.
He's trying to protect her.
Yes.
And I've interpreted it as he's now going to think hard about a plot of revenge.
Well, it could be both.
And it could be both. It could be both. Go, very good. No, thank you for that comment. Okay, so maybe I'm belaboring the point here, but to me, one of the things that I'm learning here is just how evocative this laconic text is. It's so understated. If I were writing this story, I think I would have the urge to explain myself. What do I mean here? Footnote, No, she doesn't really think David is going to, dear reader, this author doesn't do a dear reader and have footnotes by way of explanation. The author just throws it out here for our delectation. Russell?
Well, I think that the author does give us a dear reader in verse 31.
Good. Where are you now?
Verse 31, because Absalom kills Ammon, and then somebody comes to David and says, Ammon is dead, for this has been decided by Absalom ever since his sister Tamar was violated. So, to me, Absalom knew that it was wrong.
Absalom what?
Knew that it was wrong. The norms are that it is wrong because the person giving the information to David said she was violated.
That's an interesting point. So what you're saying is the speculation as a possibility that this is a norm, we would call it incest, but that intra-family sexual relationships is part of the norm here, but you're saying, no, this points it out that this is not the norm. Okay, I like that. Yeah, very good. Lynn?
Also, verse 22, makes a very strong statement.
But Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. Yeah?
But it also says that Absalom didn't utter a word, which means that he didn't want to have family to have divisions or to have...
Where do you see that?
It says here, 22, Absalom didn't utter a word.
He didn't utter a word to Amnon.
So he was hiding it along with Tamar because he didn't want to cause turmoil within the family.
Okay.
But he hated him.
Interesting. So one hypothesis here is that some of what is done and said is by way of protecting the family. I see it, of course, as he's delaying because he's hatching a plot. And he didn't want to give his cards away. So it's Amnon, let's go out for coffee. Yeah. So, multiple kinds of interpretation. Stuart?
I think there's a danger in ascribing to contemporary thought what the Bible says constituted, 3,000 years ago?
Yeah. Right. No, that's Stuart's point is really a powerful one. We have a tendency to read them through the prism of our own cultural norms, and we have to worry about that. Right. One of the ways around that, or one of the ways of attempting to get around that, is to look at what the Bible itself says. So, for example, if we want to know what the biblical view of love is, we have to be careful not to impose our view of love on the Bible. So what we would do is we would do a kind of word investigation. We would find all of the words in the Bible for love. And there are several of them. Chesed is a kind of love, loving kindness. Cheshek is a kind of passionate love. So what we do is we would gather all the ways in which that word is used and then see if we could build a worldview out of the Bible's own evidence. That would be the way to try to do that, but it would be awfully hard to totally put away our own biases. Right. No, that's it. Amy, and then Harry.
Well, if we're not supposed to read this in the context of our own lives, why do we do it every year? I mean, if you read this in the 50s, you wouldn't have this discussion. But the wisdom of it seems to me, is that we take this and put it in our own context, otherwise it is of no use to us.
Very, very good. All right, so Amy's point is that if we're trying not to impose our own worldview on a text, why are we reading it? The alternative might be just for antiquarian purposes. We're interested in the past for its own sake. And what you're suggesting is, and what we do, is we're not just reading it for its own sake. We're reading it for its contemporary relevance. Here's the way I would respond to what you're suggesting. That we're dealing with a continuum, we might say, of interpretations. And the continuum from 0 to 100 goes from interpretations that are totally implausible to interpretations that are totally plausible. Anybody with half a brain would see it. And we array interpretations along that continuum. What are the criteria for placing interpretations on that continuum? What allows us to say, this is way up close to 100? This is an interpretation that really makes sense. And to me, it can't be just, this is my interpretation and I'm in love with it, so put it at 95. I think it depends upon consensus. It depends upon who is persuaded by an interpretation over a period of time. It's not a foolproof criterion, but it has the weight of, let's call it, the community. What the community in our numbers and in our diversity is willing to embrace. Who is it who said, maybe it's Rosenzweig, that truth happens to a statement. It's not that a statement is true or false. It's that a statement becomes true as more and more people of different persuasions accept it. And there are different ways of accepting. I could say, yeah, that's plausible, but I don't exactly buy it, or that's plausible and I do buy it. So it seems to me that that's the way of both being fair to the text and trying to protect ourselves from just imposing our will on it, because the text speaks to us, but in voices, but not all voices, but also allows us to contemporize. Wouldn't you say? In other words, we need to be faithful to the text. That's what I started with. Let's look at the text internally, all the instances where one word or another that's translated love, and we do a word search and we build a case. That's just Bible for its own sake. Even if it's that's a goal, but we can never arrive at it. So that would be my response. I mean, it's part of what we do here. I mean, to go back to the votes. My view that Moses and Aaron is a sibling rivalry, that was a hypothesis, which nobody agreed with. That has persuasive force, doesn't it? Because we're all readers of the Bible, we all have a view, and if nobody embraces an interpretation on the scale of 1 to 100, that interpretation's a 5, right? Because the community won't accept it. The rabbis do have a kind of principle that we cannot impose a law on the people if the people is going to refuse to embrace it. You can't say to a community, do this because we're the authority. The authority in some way rests with the community's willingness to accept it in one way or another. Harry, and then Michael.
I think one example where what we read applies today is in verse 15, where after violating Tamar, Amnon felt a very great loathing for her. Indeed, his loathing for her was greater than the passion he had felt for her.
Yes.
Is that not a common phenomenon that after a man rapes a woman, he loathes her? Doesn't that apply today? I was going to ask first, why did he loathe her? But I can see now.
You can see why.
Having listened to this discussion, why he might.
Yeah. So you're saying, I mean, you've said it, that there is great psychological and therefore universal insight here, that it applies to more than biblical culture. Well, let's do what I suggested. Harry has given an interpretation of this, which, how am I going to do this? He's given an interpretation and laid it before us as a true interpretation. True in the sense that we understand the universality of this phenomenon. Okay? So, Harry's interpretation may be, where is it along the continuum of plausible, contemporary, or not? So, we're going to have another little vote. How many think that Harry's interpretation, this has nothing to do with Harry per se, but with the quality of the comment, how many think that this interpretation belongs way up there on the continuum of true to any society? This is an insight about the phenomenon of rape and its consequences. How many think it belongs way up there on the continuum? How many don't? So this might be an example of an interpretation that becomes true because the community accepts it as valid. So that would be a good example of how an interpretation wins the assent of a community. I like that. Michael, did you have a comment?
Yes. I think that what text and Bible did is dissected meaning of the word love between adults. And it shows that the foundation is first physical attraction, which goes through your mind and create image that you love. The second thing, it shows power and vulnerability of women. Power when one man who fell in love and was inspired was able to roll the rock all by himself, heroic action. And on another hand, you have rape, which is nothing more than satisfaction of physical desire.
Yeah.
And I think that up to now, and I believe it's in the future, writers and poets will utilize this, interpret this, as well as will allow psychiatrists and psychologists to explore how these feelings translate on modern generation.
Well, so Michael is making another universalizable claim that the role of physical attraction to whatever it leads or doesn't lead is a universal phenomenon. Isn't that your point, Michael?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Jim?
But, to your point of community acceptance, Wasn't it Goebbels who said if you tell the lie long enough, people believe it? I think it was.
It was Trump.
Yeah, right.
And he was.
What did you say?
I said it was Trump.
No, I really don't think that's appropriate, but.
Oh, well, is that possible?
Nonetheless, and it seems to work throughout the ages. And that's part of the reason, right this very moment, we as a people are in the spot we're in.
So, so Jim has, I love this conversation. We arrive at a kind of consensus that if the community is willing to accept it in our numbers, it has the quality of being true. And Jim now is questioning the adequacy of that claim. Because communities, what do we talk about? The masses, and the way in which individuals are willing to do very, very bad things in a group that they wouldn't do as individuals. So group consensus isn't necessarily the truth. So here's my revision. That group consensus is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for truth. You need to have, the way in which you're going to approach the truth is to get a lot of people, thoughtful people I might say, to give assent to it. That's sort of a prima facie quality. But it's not enough because it also depends upon the quality of the claim that's being assented to. So I think the group is important, but I think you point out not enough. That's not a QED. Lynn, yes?
Yes. In chapter 12, and where Nathan is talking to David about taking someone else's wife.
Yep.
And to your comment of this is supposed to be relevant, why are we reading it if it's not relevant?
Yes.
I think this is all very relevant to our life from back then to now, because it is the lust. Well, first of all, David took what he wanted, so he has that mentality: you take what you want. Yep. So when his son, he feels this lust that his son might feel because he had it himself, he, allowed him to have what he wanted.
Yeah.
And he was duplicit in this. That's one thing. But it's also telling us that no good comes from bad things. When when Ammon loathed her after the sexual act.
Yes.
He loathed himself. He loathed the act and her. And
self-loathing.
Himself. And he was disgusted what he did. But once his urge was fulfilled or relieved, then he realized, now that he had it satisfied, that was not a good thing to do. Uh-huh. And, we all hide things that our family has done because we don't want to either disturb the family or have it out there that we did something so terrible. But this bad thing ended with him being hated by his brother and probably killed by his brother.
Yes.
So to me, this turmoil is kind of like the nature of human beings.
Yeah.
So we can relate to this.
Sure.
I feel, yeah.
Yeah, right.
I agree.
And you may have put your finger on, well, several of you, on why David is considered to be the author of all the Psalms, because the Psalms do explore the entire range of the human condition, our emotional life. And no editor or tradition would get away with that claim were not the David of the stories sufficiently complex or to put it in your language, were not these stories, which are in some way about David and the consequences of his actions and his responses, did they not have the quality of verisimilitude, of truth? I mean, half of the Psalms say Psalm of David, but not all of them. And therefore, to make the leap that David did them all, in a way, confirms your point that these stories are sufficiently human in their range as to make it plausible that a set of poems is by the guy who experienced these stories. Yeah.
His behaviors,
Right.
his feelings, his emotions.
Yeah. And it's, again, I think it's a tribute to the author. I think the author exercises restraint and doesn't give us everything the author is thinking. The author just creates a story and lets it sit out there and trusts the reader to make plausible inferences and interpretations. In terms of composers, I think that's Mozart. I'm always amazed that Mozart, he has a beautiful tune and he plays it once. I'm saying to myself, say it again, do it again, give us more. There's really, classical restraint as opposed to romantic expansiveness, right? You admire an artist who doesn't say everything that he has or she has to say. Yeah. Candy?
So would this story be any more acceptable or truthful if Tamar had agreed to do it rather than tried to get out of it or avoid it?
What do you think?
I don't know.
As punishment for David, now transferred to his house, it wouldn't nearly have the salience that it does. She's going along with it. This is violence perpetrated by a brother on a sister, which spins out of control. One could almost say that David's violence allows or leads to the spinning out of control of all of this violence until David finally stops it. You remember when he's on his way out of Jerusalem because Absalom is after him, and one of his opponents, Shimei I think it is cursing him, and one of David's, so this is yet another expression of the violence that has its origin in the David and Bathsheba story, and one of David's assistants says to David, stop him. He is saying this to the king, and David said, no, I sinned, and what he is accusing me of is true. I have to own up to this, and that's part of the tragedy of his leaving Jerusalem. So that unless the violence, if she agrees to it, then that violence is neutralized in terms of the power of the consequences of this crime. So it might work psychologically, but if we're thinking of the meaning of this vast story, I think it would undermine it a little bit. I want to be sure that those who haven't spoken yet, Maya.
When you are reading it, I'm again and again surprised by the translation. How you get a different feeling when you read it in Hebrew versus when you read the translation, like you gave the example of the passive versus the active. So just going back here on the 20.
Verse 20.
Verse 20. So he says, Achia ha'aminun.
Wait a minute.
So,
I'm not.
ויאמר אליה אבשלום אחיה האמינון.
Yes.
So his name is Amnon, and I don't know why it's all of a sudden Aminun. And in modern Hebrew, Amin is somebody reliable. So it's kind of funny, and I don't know if it's a fun by design or not, but Amnon becomes a reliable person.
That's
which he is
interesting.
not.
Because it's one of its cognate equivalents is amen.
Right.
Amen means, so be it, I buy what you're saying, this is true. That's interesting. So Maya's suggesting a kind of irony here. The one who violates is the one who is called Mr. Reliable.
And another little thing that probably will surprise you, Amnon v'Tamar is the name of Pansy in Hebrew.
Oh, really? Okay. Nice. Good. Okay, so Doris.
I want to get back to what you said about, what you said about Absalom pausing and setting up a greater punishment for his brother. His brother Amnon is not firstborn exactly, because David has already suffered the loss of the first son with Bathsheba, that he took very hard, that he prayed that this would not happen, that God would have pity on him.
Yes.
So he lost one son,
Yes.
unnamed. Now he has lost, because Absalom has killed Amnon, another son.
Yes.
And he's about to lose a third son with Absalom. So the punishment for David just goes on and on.
The death of sons.
So it's quite right, in fact, that he's being punished, David is. And it's quite appropriate, I think, your comment about Absalom waiting, because he knows that David is going to be lenient. And Absalom sort of self-righteously takes over the moral code of killing because of the rape.
Interesting.
But basically, really what I want to say is, poor David, he suffered the loss of 3 sons, actually.
Right.
He's going to suffer the loss of Absalom eventually.
Which is the author's way of saying to us how heinous David's crime was.
In the beginning.
Because if the punishment fits the crime, and the punishment is wildly excessive, by inference, the crime must have been as well.
What is that?
Yeah, we even have that implicit in the David and Bathsheba story itself, because who is the most virtuous person in the story is Uriah, who acts with probity and so on. And David is the real cad in that story. So the story itself is already criticizing David when compared with Uriah. David tries to get Uriah to have intercourse with Bathsheba, and he refuses because I'm loyal to my comrades in the field. And then he sends Uriah back with a note to Joab. Put Uriah in the front line and have him killed. And if I'm Uriah, I'm looking at that note. Hey, he gave me maybe I'll take a peek. He doesn't look at the note, which is his death sentence. So already David is shown to be at the bottom of the continuum of morality, right there in that story. David is really taken to the cleaners in this story, isn't he? Oh my gosh. The author of the Psalms, yes.
Is this God punishing David that creates all of these events?
Maybe it's his own self-sabotage.
What was your response?
Maybe it's his own self-sabotage. I think this story, it parallels very well, I think, with, the story of Joseph and his brothers in a way. Because Reuben, he was the firstborn, he should have been the one in charge to be like, no, we shouldn't kill our brother or whatever, but he initiated this, or no, Judah. And Reuben was the one who initiated the cell. of Joseph. Judah then went down and went away, right? Paralleling with Absalom, we'll say. And Reuben's the real one that dropped the ball, I think.
Well,
in
Reuben
that whole
wanted to-
story where this is Amnon, whatever, being more like Judah in a way where he's kind of dropping it.
Okay.
Or no, sorry, I messed that up. But anyway, Reuben being like, I messed this all up.
I think Reuben wanted to return to the father, didn't he?
He's the one who said, no, leave him here, we'll sell him instead, but he was gonna try and find, he was gonna try and
Instead of
find him.
killing him.
And then Judah was the firstborn, right, that he went and he ended up leaving because he felt bad
Judah's the
about it.
fourthborn.
But that was the story of Judah and Tamar too. I was like, there was like this whole thing where Tamar was actually the one who was right. And
Right. I'm not sure I'm following your point.
Yeah.
We'll get back to it.
I messed it up in my brain. But this Tamar, if she was a virgin, it's also good to point out that she was probably very young.
She what?
She was probably young. She was a little girl.
Oh, I see, yeah. No. To Bennett's question about God, that's a great question, isn't it? Here's the answer to that question. Is God behind this? What is the answer? No and yes. I think the no is based upon the evidence of the story. The story has autonomous, moral, deciding individuals. I mean, when I got up this morning and went into the kitchen and decided, am I going to have oatmeal or am I going to have shredded wheat? I made a decision. God had nothing to do with it. Here's how I know this. I feel in my heart of hearts that I acted autonomously. How could that be wrong? I was the cause of my action. That's how this story strikes us, doesn't it? As autonomous people like ourselves, making decisions, having reacting to the reaction. So in that sense, this is a very secular story. It's no different from any novel, is it?
But who created taste buds so that you wanted to make a choice?
Who created
taste buds?
Yeah. So that's the yes part of it in a way. I wouldn't say the story is saying, but who created taste buds? Who created the human capacity? But God, I think it's Joseph Conrad. I could never remember exactly what he said. But something like the meaning of a story is not like the seeds in an orange where you can search the phenomenon and come up with it, but like a mist that permeates the whole. It's the atmosphere in which a story takes place. And the atmosphere has God in it, doesn't it? So that I think the author is extremely profound here. We human beings are autonomous and therefore responsible for our actions, which makes reward and punishment plausible. If we weren't autonomous, then punishment would be a cruelty. My favorite example is, a 1-year-old knocks over a lamp. What should I do about that? Should I punish that 1-year-old? No, because the 1-year-old is not yet autonomous enough to be responsible and therefore to be punishable. But we feel that Absalom deserves to be killed. It's tragic, but he deserves it. David deserves the punishment he's getting because David is an autonomous person. But what about Nathan? Nathan comes in and he renders a judgment. God is upset about this. So God is not what we might call a proximate cause, but God is a remote cause. Just like the rain is not God, but the nature of things means that, I'm getting myself in trouble here. Well, let me put that one aside. God is always involved in the outcome. Isn't that the Bible's view, without compromising human free will? So I think the answer is, I said no. I didn't say yes and no. I said no and yes. No, proximately. Yes, remotely. Conrad's mist. Isn't that gorgeous, though? The meaning of a story is not like the seeds in an orange, but like the mist. I can find the seeds, and there they are. Let me grab the mist. Let me try to hold the mist. I can't do it because it's not a thing. Lynn? Then I think we'll stop.
When this book was written, did the authors really believe in free will? Didn't they believe more in God having more, effect on human beings when this book was written? Because I remember as a child learning that, that God is very present, and I only learned about free will, that God gave us free will to make our own choices when I was an adult coming here to the synagogue.
Yeah.
I never thought of that before.
Yeah, here I'd like to quote one of the great philosophers of the 20th century, Ludwig Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein says, when you're confronted with a puzzle, like, is there free will there? He says, don't think, look. We shouldn't think, what did they feel in those days, but look at what this is. And who could deny that these people are real in the sense that we're real? Not as automatons or that the tight causal universe that compromises or eliminates human free will. These people are acting freely. That's the genius of the narrator. When Joseph forgives the brothers, it's not you who sent me here. It's not you who sent me here, but God. That is a deep choice by Joseph to forgive the brothers. Who could doubt that's an act of forgiveness in the hands of a great author? So I think whatever the authors believed, they certainly wrote as if free will is real. And this is, in a way, Amy's point and all of our points here, that this book is about us, because these people are like us.
But sometimes God steers free will in a certain direction. That's kind of how I was, that God is instrumental in directing you in one way or another, where, has more influence.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, I thought that was kind of like the way we used to feel, or maybe the people in this book feel, that whatever goes on, it's a part of God's plan.
Well, look, that's what Joseph says. God meant this to happen. So we have what I like to call dual causality, certainly in the Joseph story. Yeah, who split the Red Sea? God. Why? To save the people. God does intercede. This is sort of the puzzle of this whole enterprise in the Bible. What part of this is beshert? Is it determined? And what part of it is a function of our free will? Yeah, right. Aristotle makes a distinction between a baby and a rock. A baby cannot think, a rock can't think, neither can a baby. But you don't try to teach a rock how to talk. You teach a baby how to talk. And that's because though neither of them actually thinks, a baby potentially thinks. The actualization is a product of human action. The potentiality is given to us, and it's the givenness. Aristotle says the actual talking is the second actuality. The first actuality is the potential. The potential, that which is not yet actualized, is a